Dominic. That name echoes slowly in my chest every time the wind blows through the campus. We studied at the same university in the western United States, where red brick buildings and rows of maple trees stretch to the end of the paths. I once thought my youth would be straightforward, simple, until the day I met him. We met on a cold, sunny morning in a modern American literature class. I arrived late, my breath still carrying the mist from running across the lawn. When I opened the door, a few eyes looked up. Only Dominic's gaze made me pause. He sat near the back row, in a gray hoodie, black hair falling over his forehead, with a composure that seemed to slow time around him. The last empty seat was right next to him. As I sat down, Dominic tilted his head and whispered, "You okay?" His voice was deep, slightly hoarse. I nodded, introduced myself, and he gave a slight nod as if he'd known me before. Throughout the class, we barely spoke more, but I found myself noticing every movement of his. The way he twirled his pen, the slight frown when concentrating, the fleeting smile when the professor read a poem he liked. I didn't dare look for long, just pretended to take notes while my heart chased those tiny details. After class, I saw Dominic leaning against the railing outside the building, holding a paper coffee cup. I should have headed straight to the dorm, but my feet wouldn't listen. Dominic turned to me, smiling lightly. "You run fast. Looked like you just won some invisible race." I burst out laughing. The way he said it was both playful and gentle, as if he knew I was flustered but still gently opened the door for conversation. We walked along the leaf-strewn path. The conversation started with trivial things. Classes, assignments, the pizza place open late, the sound of the train gliding through the city each night. Dominic said he liked the table near the window on the third floor of the library because the light there was the softest. I told him I could only focus when listening to lo-fi music so low it was almost inaudible. He listened attentively without interrupting. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was like a space wide enough to breathe. At a turn, Dominic suddenly slowed his steps and asked, "Jeremy, have you ever felt like no matter how far you go, you keep coming back to the same person?" The question was simple, but it made my heart tremble. I didn't have words for it yet, but I knew the feeling well. I replied softly, "Maybe I have." Dominic just smiled without asking more. He left the question there, like a small stone thrown into a lake, ripples spreading gradually within me. That evening, I lay on my dorm bunk bed, the white ceiling strangely quiet. My phone lit up. "Want to study at the library with me tomorrow?" Dominic. Just a short message, but my heart skipped a beat. I typed and deleted a few times, finally replying, "Yes, see you tomorrow." A smiley face appeared right after. I pressed the phone to my chest, realizing I was smiling alone in the dark. I'd never said out loud that I was attracted to another guy, but there was something about Dominic, his deep gaze, warm voice, patient listening, that touched the part of me I'd always kept hidden. For the first time, I didn't want to hide anymore, even if I wasn't ready to name it. From that day on, every path on campus seemed to bear his mark. The crunch of dry leaves underfoot, the smell of morning coffee, the sunlight slanting across the library steps, all suddenly tied to Dominic. I knew the story was just beginning. I didn't know where it would lead, but one thing was certain. From that moment, my life was no longer a solo journey. It now included Dominic, the guy I naturally kept returning to. The next day, the main library building wore its familiar cloak of quiet. Whispers, page turns, pale golden light falling on long wooden tables. I arrived earlier than planned, not because I was overly studious, but because I couldn't hide the anticipation in my heart. I sat at the table near the window on the third floor, the exact spot Dominic had mentioned, and looked down at the rows of maple trees turning to burnt copper. Dominic appeared with his worn backpack and a smile recognizable from afar. He set a coffee cup down in front of me, pushing it toward me. "For you. Last time you looked like you needed it." I took it, the warmth spreading into my palm and beyond. We spread out our books, pretending to focus on the essay about Sylvia Plath's poetry. But every time I looked up, I caught his eyes. The way Dominic looked at me made me want to hide and yet linger longer. "Jeremy," he said softly. His voice meant only for the space between us. Have you ever felt like you're living the life others expect, not your own? I paused slightly. The question hit my softest spot. I remembered my family in the suburbs, the quiet expectations, the phrases like, "You'll find a good girl someday," as if the script was already written. I nodded slowly. Yes, more than I'd like to admit. Dominic smiled lightly, but it wasn't entirely joyful. Me too. He didn't elaborate right away. We sat in silence, but it wasn't a stranger's silence. It was like two people standing on the edge of the same secret, not yet daring to name it. The afternoon passed with scattered stories. Dominic talked about moving to the city with just 2 suitcases, feeling like he was learning to start over from scratch. I shared how I once thought everything in life would go in a straight line, then realized it was much more winding. With each piece he shared, I felt Dominic opening another small door for me to enter his world. As the library prepared to close, we left in the late afternoon light. The sky was a diluted purple from the fading sun. The wind carried the scent of waffles from the vendor cart at the gate. Dominic looked at me, asking half jokingly, half seriously, "If one day you discover your heart has veered off the path everyone set for you, what would you do?" I replied in a voice softer than the wind. "Maybe I'd stop pretending." Dominic nodded slightly, his eyes lighting up, like thanking something unspoken. In the days that followed, we met so often it became a habit without needing appointments. Lunch at the taco place 2 blocks from school. Late evenings sitting on the dorm steps listening to distant cars. Fragmented messages I reread before sleep. Dominic had a habit of hooking his fingers into his backpack strap when stressed, and I had a habit of looking at him exactly in those moments. One evening, rain poured suddenly. We sheltered under the awning of the arts building, the smell of rain on concrete rising intensely. Dominic held out his hand to catch the water, drops sliding down his wrist. I suddenly said, "I feel like I keep coming back to the same point, no matter where I start." Dominic tilted his head. "What point?" I swallowed hard, no longer avoiding you. From that, the world went quiet. Dominic didn't laugh, didn't joke. He just looked at me for a long time, as if weighing each breath. "Jeremy," he whispered, "I've been afraid of this." My heart faltered. "Afraid of what?" Dominic turned to the white blur of rain. "Afraid that if I feel the same, I won't be able to go back to my old life." Perhaps that answer was both an admission and a warning. I heard my heart pounding in my chest. We stood very close, close enough to hear the rain shattering, close enough for warmth to mingle, but still with a fragile distance neither dared to break. I said softly, almost to myself, "There are paths, once taken, no one really wants to turn back from." Dominic closed his eyes for a second, as if gathering all his courage. When he opened them, his gaze had changed, honest, no longer defensive. "I don't remember when it started," he said, "but every time I think about leaving here, the only thing pulling me back is the thought that you're still here." I smiled, a trembling but liberating smile. No grand declarations, just the simple truth between us, spoken in the rain. That night, I returned to my room, my shirt still smelling of rain and my heart of Dominic. I realized what scared me most wasn't others knowing I loved a guy, but not daring to live true to my feelings for Dominic. For the first time, I didn't want to run from anything. But college life wasn't a sealed box just for the two of us. Assignment deadlines, curious glances, floating invisible prejudices. All still there, waiting to test the fragility we just dared to name. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be all beautiful rainy afternoons. But right now, one thing rang clear. I, with all the circles of going and returning in my life, was choosing Dominic. And I had a premonition. Our story had only just touched the threshold of change. The following days felt like entering a new orbit. Neither of us declared anything, but everything between me and Dominic had shifted. Accidental touches now carried a different weight. When his shoulder brushed mine on the cold stone stairs in the morning, I felt my heart vibrate like a string lightly plucked. We still talked about assignments, the future, the small things in student life, but beneath those ordinary words, There was an undercurrent that never stopped moving. One Saturday afternoon, Dominic texted, "Want to go to the lake behind the stadium? I need to get out of the room for a bit." I pulled on my jacket and stepped into the cold air. The lake was wide, its surface flat like a gray-silver mirror reflecting the low sky. We sat on a slightly damp wooden bench, the wind whipping through our collars, carrying the smell of decaying leaves. "Jeremy?" Dominic said, his eyes following a lone duck slicing through the water. "Have you ever felt like you've just found where you belong, but you're afraid of losing it?" I knew he was talking about us. I replied, "The day I realized my feelings for you, I felt both light and terrified. Light because I didn't have to pretend anymore. Terrified because I didn't know what would happen if I kept going." Dominic smiled sadly. "I guess we're standing right on that edge." We were silent for quite a while. I heard my heartbeat blend with the wind on the lake's surface. Then Dominic turned to me, his voice low. "I don't want to do this halfway. If I step toward you, I know I'll go all the way." That statement, simple yet solemn, was like an unspoken promise. I replied, no longer hesitating, "Then step together. If we turn back, let's turn back together." Dominic chuckled softly, exhaling a white puff in the cold air. "You always say exactly what I'm thinking." I wanted to say because I pay attention to you, but held back. Some truths don't need to be said loudly. They shine on their own between two people. We started appearing together more often. In the cafeteria, on the basketball court, on the gravel paths behind the dorms. Sometimes I noticed glances lingering longer than usual. Some were just curious, others carried unspoken questions. I no longer avoided them like before, but I didn't flaunt anything either. What mattered to me was Dominic's calm gaze as he walked beside me. One evening, the school hosted an outdoor movie screening. On the lawn covered with thin blankets, students gathered, laughter mingling with the smell of buttered popcorn. We sat next to each other, the screen's light casting highlights and shadows on Dominic's face. I realized I barely remembered what the movie was about. I only remembered the feeling of his hand brushing the back of mine. He didn't grasp it right away. We let our fingers rest side by side, a tiny distance like the whole universe. Then very gently, Dominic interlaced his fingers with mine. That moment had no fireworks or swelling music. Just the wind rustling the grass and my heart beating just fast enough to know I was truly alive. I didn't think about tomorrow, didn't think about what others might say. I only thought about the warmth in my palm, where Dominic was there, without hiding. After the screening, we walked slowly toward the dorms. Streetlights stretched long shadows on the ground. At the building's entrance, Dominic stopped. "Jeremy," he said, "I might mess up a lot of things. I don't know how to explain this to my family, to my friends. But with you, I don't want to pretend for another minute." I looked straight into his eyes. "Me neither." He stepped closer. "No rush." Just the distance gradually closing, breath by breath. When our foreheads touched, I heard his heartbeat. It wasn't perfect. It trembled, just like mine. And there, in the empty hallway with the faint smell of laundry detergent, we kissed for the first time. That kiss wasn't the answer to every question, but it was the truest thing I'd ever touched. In the days after, happiness didn't come noisily. It lay in small details. Messages like, "Have you eaten breakfast?" The scarf he wrapped around my neck when the wind was strong. Study sessions turning into laughter because we both lost focus. But alongside happiness were thin clouds of anxiety. Dominic sometimes grew more pensive than usual. He stared into the distance when someone made a careless joke about standards. I saw him pull his hand away a bit quicker when an acquaintance passed by. I didn't blame him. I understood the invisible walls we were learning to climb. One evening, Dominic didn't reply to my messages. Then the next morning, he didn't come to class. I started feeling restless, like sand caught in my heart. In the afternoon, he sent a single line, "Meet me at the wooden bridge behind the dorms." I ran there, the cold wind whipping my face without me noticing. Dominic stood there, hands in his coat pockets, his eyes heavy with something. "I just talked to my mom," he began, his voice hoarser than usual. She wants me to come home this weekend. She guessed something. I'm not as good at lying as I thought. My heart tightened. Are you okay? Dominic smiled. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. I don't know. I just know. In all the scenarios swirling in my head, one thing doesn't change. No matter where I go, I think of you. I stepped closer, not saying grand words. I just placed my hand on his shoulder. If you have to go, I'll wait. Not for you to become someone else, but for you, the one standing here. Dominic closed his eyes, sighed, as if leaning on those words to stand firmer. That night, for the first time since meeting Dominic, I clearly felt that love isn't just light. It's also the darkness two people must learn to walk through without letting go. I lay in bed, the night stretching out, the word return echoing in my mind like an old, persistent rhythm. I didn't know what Dominic's trip home would bring, confrontation, denial, or prolonged silence, but I knew one truth. No matter what, my heart would choose the same direction, toward him. The weekend came faster than I wanted. On Friday morning, Dominic stood at the interstate bus stop, his black suitcase at his feet, hands gripping his backpack strap like holding on to an unyielding thought. I arrived early, just to have a few more minutes seeing him before everything became uncertain. The sky was overcast, low clouds pulling the whole city closer to the ground. I'll text you when I get there, Dominic said, his voice trying to stay calm. I nodded. There were so many things I wanted to say, but they stuck in my throat. Finally, I managed, "You're not alone." Dominic looked at me for a long time, then gave me a light hug. The embrace wasn't long, wasn't showy, but enough for me to feel his heartbeat and know that the fear in me wasn't mine alone. The bus rolled away, trailing a thin plume of smoke. Dominic's silhouette grew smaller behind the foggy glass. I stood there for a long time, as if by standing still I could keep everything unchanged. But the city kept moving, and time waits for no one. The days without Dominic stretched out. The dorm felt too big, the library too quiet. I still went to class, did assignments, smiled when needed, but there was a void in my heart shaped like a person. In the evenings, my phone screen became the only light I waited for. Dominic's messages were sparser, shorter. I'm okay. Long day. Talk more tomorrow. I read each word like decoding a code from the world he was trapped in. On Sunday night, he called. Dominic's voice was hoarse and tired. In the background, kitchen sounds, faint clinks of dishes. Jeremy, he said. I told my mom. My heart stopped for a second. What did she say? The other end was silent for so long I thought the call dropped. Then Dominic exhaled. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She just went quiet and said she needs time. I saw everything in her eyes. Worry, fear, and love. But I also saw the question. So what will your life be like now? I wanted to pull Dominic out of all those glances and questions. But I only had my voice. You were brave, I said, slowly so each word didn't slip past him. Whatever happens next, you haven't lost who you are. On the other end, Dominic chuckled softly, a sound like a breath. The only thing I'm sure of is, I miss you. After that call, I sat by the window for a long time. Night wind slipped through the thin curtain, carrying music from the neighboring dorm. I realized that loving someone isn't just being there when the weather's fine, but being present in the in-between spaces, when they're learning to stand steady amid the waves of their own life. On Tuesday, Dominic returned to school. I saw him from afar in the crowded courtyard, still in his gray hoodie, still with his familiar walk, but his eyes held something deeper, more settled. When he saw me, those eyes lit up, not loudly, just like dawn breaking. I approached, no need for words. Dominic hugged me, this time longer. All the surrounding noise seemed pushed back. We sat in a small coffee shop on the edge of campus. Dominic spoke little, not because he was hiding, but because some things don't need many words to explain. Mom told me to make sure what I choose brings me peace, he said, stirring his coffee until the foam dissolved. I thought of you, and I knew the answer. I looked at him without asking more. Some moments, love is spoken through fearless silence. But life rarely revolves around just two people. Rumors spread faster than wind. One afternoon, as I was leaving class, I heard someone whisper behind me, "See? Jeremy and Dominic. Must be like that." The voice wasn't malicious but not kind either. My spine chilled. Dominic came up beside me right then. He heard it. Our eyes met, in a brief moment holding hesitation, protection, and choice. He took my hand, not hiding, not showing off. The hallway seemed quieter. We just kept walking like that. Not a declaration, just a refusal to bow before the fear that had clung to our shoulders too long. I noticed Dominic's hand trembling slightly. I squeezed it lightly, as if saying I'm here. That night, we sat on the low roof behind the dorm building, where students sneaked up to watch the city. Lights stretched like a golden river, far off the echoing train whistle. Dominic rested his head on my shoulder. "I once thought love was a simple straight line," he said softly. "Turns out it's like a compass. No matter how many circles I make, the needle always points back to the same direction." I laughed in my throat. "Hope it's a good direction." Dominic nodded. "It's you." I didn't promise him a perfect future. I only promised the one thing I was sure of, that in the upcoming turns, I wouldn't be the one turning away before trying to go all the way together. The wind blew, carrying the cold and metallic taste of night. For the first time, I felt fear and peace could coexist in a single moment. We didn't know the biggest challenge was yet to come. But in that exact moment, under the wide open sky, I thought simply, if life is a chain of going and returning, the person I forever return to is still Dominic. The weeks that followed were like a two-layered wave. On top, the steady rhythm of coursework, schedules, rushed coffee dates. Below, the silent movements of emotions that only Dominic and I felt clearly. We learned to breathe in spaces with others, and to live truly in the intervals just for us. One early winter morning, with frost still clinging to the lawn, Dominic pulled me to the old instrument room in the humanities building. The wooden door creaked. Inside was the smell of aged wood and light filtering through frosted glass panes. In the corner sat a piano with peeling paint. "No one uses this place anymore," he said, dusting off the thin layer on the keys. Like a little secret, Dominic sat down, trying a few notes. The piano sounded hoarse but warm. I leaned against the wall, watching his hands glide over the keys. He didn't play any famous piece, just pieced together scattered melodies into something very Dominic, hesitant at first, then gradually bold. "I'm not good at playing," he laughed. "But whenever my head gets chaotic, I come here, like a way to remind myself that some things still make sound even if not perfect." I stepped closer, standing beside him. "Keep playing," I said softly. "I want to remember this sound." Dominic looked up at me, his eyes softening. "Then you have to promise to remember me too when the sound stops." I replied without thinking, "I already am." Right in that small room, Dominic told me about his high school years in his hometown, where everyone knew each other and rumors spread faster than news. About the first time he realized he was different, and his initial reflex was to hide. "I tried to do everything right," he said, eyes fixed on the keys. "But the more I tried, the further I felt from myself. Meeting you, it's like seeing the path I've always been afraid to take." I placed my hand on his back. "It's not a scary path, just new." That newness, of course, didn't bring only light. One afternoon, I received an email from my advisor, brief, inviting me for a private meeting. In the appointment, he spoke carefully. "There are whispers in the halls about you and Dominic. I don't care about your personal life. Just want to remind you that stories like that sometimes affect focus and opportunities. No insults, just concern wrapped in polite paper." Still, I felt my heart constrict. That evening, I told Dominic everything on the slope leading to the dorms. Golden lights made the fresh thin snow look like glowing dust. Dominic slowed his steps. "I don't want to be a burden to you," he said. I stopped, turning to face him directly. "You're not a burden. The only thing weighing on me is that we have to consider things others never think about." Dominic pursed his lips, then nodded, as if swallowing a new resolve. But the real challenge came on a day we hadn't anticipated. There was a big school basketball game. The stands were packed, music blaring, cheers exploding the air. After the game, classmates dragged everyone to the parking lot to celebrate. Amid the chaotic laughter, a burly student, face red from beer, blurted out jokingly, "Hey, you two are stuck together like rom-com leads." The group laughed with some whistles. No one meant harm yet, but Dominic froze. I felt his hand suddenly go cold. That night, Dominic withdrew into silence. When it was just us, he said, "I hate feeling like I have to prove something. Hate that I still let harmless comments make me shrink." He looked at me, torn between strength and fatigue. "Sometimes I wonder if one day I might hurt you, just because I'm not brave enough yet." That question was like a dull blade. I shook my head. "Hurt doesn't come from you being afraid. It comes if you run from us." Dominic closed his eyes, sighed, then whispered softly, "Then I won't run." Winter crept deeper into the campus. Mornings blanketed in fog, evenings in wind. We wrapped into each other's lives in simple ways. Studying together in a small cafe with windows fogged by breath, sharing a pair of gloves when one forgot, leaving notes like "drink water" in each other's backpacks. I began to understand that love isn't a chain of continuous brilliant moments, but a quiet flow, sustained by very small things, and the repeated choice each day. One late night, the first snow fell. The whole campus was white and silent, like the world on mute. We walked side by side on the thinly snow-covered path, our shoes crunching softly. Dominic suddenly stopped in the middle of the courtyard, looking up at the sky like trying to recall a star's name. "Jeremy," he said, his voice deepening. "Maybe someday things won't be as easy as now. Maybe I'll stumble, doubt, panic. But every time, I know where I'll return." I didn't ask where. I knew. I stepped closer, taking his hand in the space filled only with falling snow. No audience, no slogans, just two young guys learning to love without apologizing for it. I said, "If you get lost, I'll light a lamp. And if I get lost, just call my name." Dominic smiled, a smile from deep in his chest, then pulled me into a warm embrace in the cutting cold. That night, on the thin snow, two parallel footprints were imprinted. I looked at them and understood. The path ahead might be winding, but we'd chosen to walk it together. And no matter how wide the world, my heart still followed a clear orbit, the orbit of returning. To that guy,